Hi everybody, I know quite a few of you, but not all of you. So if you don't know me, my name is James Martin. I look after all the apps engineering and training in the UK. And we're going to show you this new training course we have, which is, as you can see, designing certified Microsoft Teams rooms with Qsys. Now, a bit of background on how this came about. As you probably saw, we announced quite a few Microsoft Teams integrations and a lot of Teams certified devices over the past, I suppose it's been past few months. And some of those features we're talking about are things like doing automatic camera tracking, doing Qsys control on Teams touch interfaces, things like that. So with this, we really wanted to take the opportunity to firstly go into a bit more detail about how you can build a really scalable Teams room using Qsys. So instead of using lots of USB peripherals and things like that, we're going to look at how we can do it with AV bridging and solve a lot of problems in the sort of design phase and the integration phase with having to do a lot with USB. Also looking at how we can give Teams a network-based AV system rather than a USB-based one, so we can make it much more scalable. And then looking at what I was just talking about, so Teams Qsys integrations beyond just basic certification to improve commissioning time, but also improve the user experience and make it a really nice space to work with for the end user. So I've got a few things to look at here. We're going to first have a little overview of Teams before QSC gets involved. So what makes up a Teams room? What are the system components, if you like, and what are the common issues that you might run into? Secondly, we're going to be looking at how we can then scale up that Teams experience. So how we can use Qsys to do that with AV bridging. We're going to explain and clarify some bits about certification, Team certification for rooms and also for devices. And we'll have a look at Qsys control for MTR, which is a really key feature. And we'll look at how that actually works from a user perspective, but also for you guys having to integrate these kind of rooms. We'll make sure we understand everything we need to actually implement that. And then just going to have a look at a few actual drawings and a few room designs. So we're going to start off with a sort of medium-sized meeting room. We're going to scale that up and see what we can add when we do that. And then we're going to move into a more complex space, like a divisible space. And then just a few words at the end on some further integration we've done aside from the certification element. And as Rob said, any questions you have as we go through, maybe just raise your hand in Teams, or we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. So let's get started. So we're going to start off with a bit of an overview about what Teams rooms actually is. A lot of you will be familiar with this anyway, but essentially it's an instance of Teams, a bit like what we're using now, of course, for this meeting, but it's really geared towards presenting itself as a room rather than as a Teams that's tied to a certain user account. So we're all using Teams desktop now, probably, and that's, I'm using my login on Teams desktop, and that represents me. But what you'd have in Teams rooms, if you have a compute device like the one you see here, that's running Teams rooms. It's using the same back end, but it's presented in a very different way. So you can see there's a touch console there, and that's actually connected with USB. You can kind of think of it like another display for that PC, but it's specifically the touch interface for the end user. And then in a simple room like this, this might be a huddle room, perhaps something like that. You basically just connect USB microphone, USB audio device, USB speakers, perhaps camera, HDMI monitor, and if that was a touchscreen, you could have that on USB as well. So that's all totally fine for a small space like this. But this is something we've been talking about at QSC for quite some time, is that USB and HDMI are really great for small point-to-point connections, but when you start to scale up your system, you're likely to run into all sorts of issues. And I'm sure we're familiar with this. Firstly, length limitations. USB really length limited to about 5 meters on a good day. HDMI maybe 15 meters, probably a bit less in reality. And of course, these are designed to be point-to-point connections. So when we get into more complex spaces, maybe we want multiple cameras, multiple displays, switching, things like that, we end up adding a lot of extra bits of hardware. So we might have USB extenders, USB switches, HDMI matrices, other things. And this all adds complexity, it all adds cost, more programming, and of course, possible points of failure as well. So here I've got a diagram, and this is from Microsoft's own literature actually, and before you get a QSC system involved, where for a large room you can see that on a technical level we're basically doing the same thing. We're basically still connecting USB devices into that PC, but via a whole shopping list of display extenders and USB extenders. And that single compute device now has to be tied into many different things that are actually geographically quite spread out across the room. Aside from the fact that you're needing to connect multiple things into it rather than just one or two. So it gets pretty complicated, and that's problem number one. Scalability. USB and HDMI, it's fine for small spaces, but for larger spaces, we're going to end up adding complexity and points of failure if we keep designing stuff in that way. Now, secondly is certification. And team certification is getting talked about quite a lot at the moment. There's really two elements to this. And firstly, you have what's called device certification. Now, Teams, a bit like Teams Desktop, you can plug in any old webcam. Like right now, I've got what's this, like a Microsoft webcam, but it could be all sorts of different things. And it's going to work because it's based on USB standards. Same with audio devices. You can plug in lots of different devices, and Teams Room is the same in that you can plug in lots of different things, but they want to ensure that the users have a really consistent, really high quality experience. So, for example, if you plug in an uncertified device for audio, you're going to find that might be a DSP, perhaps. Maybe you plug in a non-certified DSP. You're going to find that Teams is going to keep doing quite a bit of heavy processing internally while that DSP is trying to do it as well. If you plug in a camera that's not certified, you might get a message about that in Teams Rooms. So you want to make sure your devices are certified firstly. But then secondly, there's this thing called room certification. And room certification is really something that perhaps the end user IT department might be concerned with, where if they've got an issue with Teams and they want to speak to Microsoft about it, Microsoft firstly are going to check that room is basically following their rules, their design guidelines, and that it's certified as a collective system rather than just as a collection of devices. So for a certified room, you've got these three pillars here. You've firstly got the compute device and the Teams room controller, which are certified together. So that room controller connects to the PC with USB. You've got the video accessory, and that would usually just be like a USB webcam, USB camera, and then the complete audio signal path. So that's going to include, for a complex room, not just USB mic and a headset, something like that. It's going to be maybe a network microphone, maybe a DSP, amplifier, loudspeakers, and that needs to be certified together. And if any of these things are not certified, the room is not certified, and then the support the end user is going to be able to get from Microsoft is going to be quite limited. So that's another potential issue, is that as we get more complex spaces, it's going to be difficult to make sure these rooms are certified rooms that are going to be supported by Microsoft. And then thirdly, control. Now, this is a picture of somebody using the Teams touch interface. And of course, Microsoft want to have a completely consistent user experience across all these different systems, so that, I could go into a Teams room at the QSC office and use it there, and then I could go down the road to somebody else's office, if they let me in, and use a Teams room over there, and I'm not going to have any problems because that experience is going to be the same, which is obviously the whole point. The issue with this, though, again, for more complex spaces, is that you have got limited options for adding other controls, and that might be like AV controls. Maybe you want to control third-party devices. Maybe you want to control air conditioning or lighting or something like that. So sometimes people are going to add two touch panels. Sometimes you might have a Teams touch panel, and you might have a control system touch panel for AV control stuff, and that's not great for the end user. So the end user, if you imagine someone who's not particularly technical, they go into the room, they see two touch panels, they're doing different things. It's just immediately a negative experience as they come in to use that Teams room system. And of course, it adds complexity and it adds costs as well. So what we would like is to not have to have multiple interfaces. We could just have everything we want on the Teams UI. So here's our three issues: scalability, certification, and control. And we're going to fix these with Qsys in the following ways. So we're going to use Qsys AV bridging and that network topology that Qsys is built on to build a scalable system that can be any size or any complexity. For certification, only QSC has these certified solutions, certified room solutions for what we're calling specialty rooms or high value spaces. We have that certified collectively with QSC equipment. And then for control, we can use the Qsys control engine to allow for custom user control interfaces from Qsys, controlling whatever you want, but having those appear natively on the Teams touch interface. So we're going to break down how we go about doing that. All right. So firstly, this issue of scalability, let's have a look at that. And with Qsys, we're not going to be connecting a bunch of USB peripherals to this PC. So here's our PC, here's our touch interface, and that would be a Logitech Tap as part of our certified solution. And then instead of connecting lots of different peripherals, we're going to connect just a core or a Qsys USB bridge. And remember that a Qsys core is doing all of our audio processing. It is also doing all of our control processing. It's managing video routing and things like that. And then it has this AV USB bridging. And what that means is that we connect one device, but we actually present two devices to the PC. We present an echo cancelling speakerphone, and we present a standard webcam. And of course, a lot of people have been doing this for quite some time with all sorts of different soft codecs. And essentially what it means is that the core is like a gateway. It's like a gateway for that Teams room to have a single USB connection, which actually lets it talk to a whole ecosystem of network peripherals. And these might be things like IP-based cameras with camera switching, amplifiers, loudspeakers, other USB bridges, and of course third-party network microphones as well. The nice thing about this is that we can scale that network up as much as we want. We can add all sorts of different peripherals to do all sorts of different jobs. And the Teams PC connection isn't getting any more complicated. It's not having to see more devices and worry about more devices being device certified. It's just seeing a core which is certified. And the core is then going to manage this scalable network-based approach. So just having a little bit more of a detailed look at the physical connections that are going on here. It's going to look something like this. And for a small room like this, you could just have one mic and one camera, perhaps, and that would be totally fine. As I said, the nice thing about this approach is if you go up to these specialty high value rooms like divisible rooms, training rooms, boardrooms, all hands spaces, you don't then have to have this compromised system that's made up of lots of extra bits of hardware, widgetry. We just add the additional endpoints we want. So for a larger room, we might have two mics, we might have two cameras as well. We might be controlling stuff in the room, and we haven't made that backbone of the system where it connects to the PC any more complex. So this means the benefits of the network are available to us. No cable length restrictions, no extenders, terminating connections in the field, all very, very helpful. Worth pointing out that when we're talking about this ecosystem, the number of peripherals is limited by the core that we choose. So, for example, if I wanted to have lots of cameras, even the Core Nano and the Core 8 Flex, which are our latest Qsys cores, and you can think of these as the, I guess they're like the entry-level Qsys core at this point, even they support 32 Qsys peripherals, which is a huge amount for even quite a complex space. So we're not going to be worrying about how much we can extend the system in terms of peripherals. And this approach, as I said, allows for flexible spaces or for centralized processing as well. It's feasible that you could have a large Qsys system managing multiple rooms, although we're not going to look at an example of that today. Now, the reason we're able to do this is that we've been able to get quite a large number of devices Teams certified, with some more in the pipeline as well. And there is a website called the Microsoft Teams Devices Showcase. And this is a website where Microsoft basically lists the room solutions that are currently available. I should point out right now, I don't think the European version of this is up to date, but the US version has all of what I'm about to talk about on there. And this is where you're actually going to see the room solutions. So for example, for a small space, you might see what you have there on the bottom right, where you've got a core, you've got an amp, you've got some ceiling speakers, a single Sennheiser Team Connect Ceiling 2, which is the the microphone that has been certified as part of that full audio signal path. There's a Logitech Rally there, which is great for smaller rooms where we just need one camera. We're not doing any switching or anything like that. And then there is a Logitech Tap as well for the touch interface. But for larger spaces, you're going to see ones like on the top right where there's multiple microphones, there's multiple sets of loudspeakers, and there's Qsys PTZ IP cameras there. And it's worth pointing out that Teams Rooms doesn't natively support USB camera switching. So if we were to connect to Logitech Rallies or any other USB webcam, we can't dynamically switch between those mid-call. And that's where the real value of the Qsys camera solution comes in, is that with Qsys, we've still got that one connection to the Teams PC, but we could have 2 cameras, 3 cameras, 4 cameras, whatever you want, and we can switch between all of those. And we're not actually switching on the USB end, we're switching on the network end. So the Teams PC is not doing anything clever, it's just seeing a single webcam, but we can have multiple cameras going into that. And that's why it's going to be really good for larger spaces where you want to have different angles and that sort of thing. And it's worth pointing out here, guys, that the number of devices we've got certified is actually larger than any other manufacturer at the moment. So we've not just got a few odd devices certified. For example, with the acoustic design series, we've got most of that range certified, and you've got pendant speakers, ceiling speakers, column speakers, what have you. SPA series, we've not just got a single amp certified, we've got the whole range. Core 110F certified, the Core 8 Flex, Core Nano are in the process of getting certified at the moment. It says here the USB bridge and the PTZ 20x60 are in the final stages of certification. I actually believe that they are now certified as well. And then, as I said earlier, we've partnered up with Sennheiser with their Team Connect Ceiling 2 microphone for all of these room solutions. So just a little check. Any questions at this point, guys?
Yeah, James, I'm more familiar with the Shure ceiling arrays. We're now seeing these Sennheisers that you're producing. What is the honest opinion of them? Are they as good as the Shure?
Yeah, I'll give you my honest opinion. I'm really impressed with them.
It's only because I trust you.
Oh, thanks very much.
Cool.
So as you know, the Shure one, it's you set up a bunch of different loads to cover the room how you want to cover the room, and then you're basically just doing auto mixing between those. And there's a little bit of tracking with each one where it will kind of follow you a little bit as you move in and out of it, but it's basically fixed. And that can be really good for certain rooms where you want to be very specific about what you cover and what you don't. But the Sennheiser one, firstly, in my opinion, it's much quicker to set up. It sounds really good, but the way it works is different. So it doesn't have multiple beams, which you manually set up. It just has one which tracks very, very quickly around the room. So as people are speaking, it goes to the source it wants to go to at that point. Now that has a few advantages. Firstly, as I said, there's no real setup that you have to do. You can do quite a bit of configuration on it, but I've had it where we just put it in a room, connect it up with Dante, and it's all, just sounds brilliant, works really well. But also it's only one channel rather than 8, which you have on the 910. And that's quite cool because that means you can actually have more of them and you don't need loads and loads of echo cancellation, which is a nice thing to have. I should point out that you can now, they've just released a firmware update. You can now be really specific about exclusion zones. So you can say this angle from the microphone, never pick that up, but this zone over here is a priority zone. So if anybody speaks there, that's more important. And you can go around excluding all sorts of things and prioritizing other things. So yeah, I'm pretty impressed with it. It works very well. And at the end, I've got a few other tie-ins with that we've got, which are really cool. Something we've just started. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, guys. Well, in that case, I'm going to move on to talking about Qsys control for MTR. So we talked about how there's a few issues around control in these complex spaces. We can solve these really nicely with Qsys. So remember that every Qsys core, when you get a Qsys core, it's ready to process audio, control Qsys video switching, and it's going to be monitoring and managing all your Qsys devices. We've got a feature license, which is called the Teams feature license, and that adds control scripting functionality and UCI deployment functionality, which you can also get as 2 separate licenses if you want. And this is going to unlock many further Teams integrations, as well as unlocking a full, extremely powerful control system without any additional hardware, which is really important. Now, because Qsys is one platform which does audio, video, and control, rather than you, if you're the programmer, and a lot of you will know this already, but instead of having to have one program for user interface and one for control and one for video and one for audio, you just have Qsys Designer. There's one application to talk to it. Now that means that we're able to give you one file, one designer file that is basically pre-configured for these Teams rooms solutions, and that looks a bit like this. So we've made a Qsys sample design file for Teams. Now, importantly, this includes the audio signal path that has been used to meet Microsoft's certification. So that includes the Sennheiser microphones already pre-configured in the design, the echo cancellation, the rest of the processing is all done for you. And there's speaker selection built in, which includes all of the certified loudspeakers from the acoustic design range. You can see on the left there's actually a little wizard, and that's a screenshot from the designer file. That's not a separate application, where you can just work through step 1, step 2, step 3. You set up the room name, you set up the type of speakers you're using, you put in the IP of the microphone, the IP of the Teams room PC. So you can actually basically commission the whole room through a little wizard that we have built in there. Now, other than it just being the audio processing, it also includes a lot of these optimizations that we've tied in with Teams, including this control element. So let me show you how you might do that. I've got a little screen capture here, and I want to create a user interface using this file and deploy it on my Teams touch interface. And you can see here, as I scroll down, we can dive into the audio config and change elements of that. We can go and look at the video because that's sitting in the same program. And what I want to do is I want to take the camera presets and I want to have these on a user interface. So I've got just a snapshot controller here. And here's a UCI that we've thrown together. And we're just going to put those snapshot controls on the UCI like that. And you can see this does not look ready for prime time. But we've included with the file a Teams CSS style. And if I select that Teams CSS style, it's going to apply the Microsoft Teams Room brand guidelines to my UCI. And for something I've just dragged in, I just get to choose a CSS class that I might want. And there's a few button options. I'm going to choose button snapshot there. And now we can see that they've got the right font, the right text size, the right color. And then I can just label these so we can say what they're doing. And the whole idea of this is that what's going to happen is the user is going to see the Teams user interface, which is the same everywhere. They want to switch to the extra settings, the AV interface, whatever you want to give them. And we want to make it really easy for you to style that in exactly the same way, because it's all about that user experience. If they go into another screen and it looks completely different, it's just a sort of startling thing for somebody who's using this touchscreen for the first time. Now, the way we deliver that to the PC is like this. Remember, the USB connection is going to be doing our audio and video to the PC. If we also connect the PC to our AV network, or this could be on the corporate network, the whole thing could be, if you want, then when we put in the Teams Room's IP address into that Qsys design file, it's going to present that UCI on the second page of the Teams interface. And the thing on the Teams PC that allows all this to happen, there's just a little application that runs in the background, which is called Qsys Control for MTR. And you can install this on the MTR. It's included when you download Qsys Designer. You don't have to run it every time or anything like that. It just runs in the background and basically unlocks this extra functionality where the Teams user interface can show Qsys UCIs. And then the end result looks like this. So here I am, I've come into the room, I've got my Logitech tap. There's a Teams interface with all the Teams stuff. We've got new meeting, join meeting, etc. And if I just press this button on the bottom right, then it flips round to whatever I've got on my Qsys UCI. And this is the one we just made. So in this example, we've got the ability to switch cameras, which remember you can't natively do with Teams. That requires the Qsys AV bridging and our network switching. And I've also got any other control you want. I've got some extra settings for the audio. I can control the displays. I can turn the temperature up and down, close the shades, dim the lights, whatever you want. So while this is a pretty simple UCI, it's also worth pointing out that this can be absolutely anything you want. It doesn't even have to look like this, although that is what we'd recommend. If you want to get very creative with it and do all sorts of fun things, then feel free, you can do that.
Can you add more pages if you need them, Jim?
You can, yes. If you've got UCI, if you've got the normal navigation buttons that you have on a UCI and Qsys, they will also work. Yeah.
Or just use multiple layers, as I tend to do.
Or layers, yeah, absolutely. So it's basically under the hood. What it is I think it's an HTML5 rendering engine. So we have HTML5 option for viewing UCIs in Qsys now, and I'm pretty sure it's just that under the hood. So anything you can do with a UCI normally, you can do with this. And in Designer, again, guys, if you guys who are programmers who use Qsys Designer, and you'll be familiar with the UCI viewer component and the TSC component and things like that. This is another component, but it's called MTR. And within that, you can change the UCI that you have on it. Okay. Cool. So that's a really important feature. And you can see it doesn't need extra control processors or anything like that to make it work. Now what we're going to do is we're going to have a little look at designing some rooms. Okay, we're going to start off with something simple, and then you'll see we can keep scaling it up. So firstly, we'll have a look at something like this sort of size, a fairly straightforward meeting room. Now, any of these rooms need to start with a MTR. In this case, it's a Dell MTR. And this being a fairly straightforward room, this one is just going to connect to the display. And we're controlling that display, connected to the same network as the core. And this being a simple, smallish room, we can just have a Logitech Rally. We're just doing one camera, so that can just connect to the PC. And also that PC is probably going to be near the front of the room, so we're not going to have issues with USB lengths and things like that. Qsys Core with a USB bridge, and that is doing our audio bridging. And this could be a Core 110, could be one of the new ones, the Core Nano, the Core 8 Flex, certification pending on those. And we can see that the PC and the core are both connected to the outside world via the IT network, and also this local network as well. And as I said, if all the AV is running on the corporate network, then it's just one connection, obviously. We'll add a SPA amplifier and connect some loudspeakers. And of course, you could connect many different types of loudspeakers. And in this case, we've gone with some columns. Very nice. Now, going out into the room, we've got our table there, we've got Logitech Tap. Now, even though I was complaining about USB extenders earlier, the Logitech Tap comes with quite a nice one. This does have to be a USB connection, and you can get it with a 10-meter fiber USB cable or a 20-meter, or they also make a Cat5 extension, which can then run through your structured cabling you might already have installed. So many ways of getting that connected back to the PC. Microphone, of course, is going to be the Sennheiser Team Connect Ceiling 2, and we're also going to have control of the environment. So there we go, nice and straightforward. Okay, so let's scale it up a bit bigger. So we're gonna go bigger here. I mean, it might even be a bigger table than that. Let's think it's a bit of an executive boardroom type situation, and maybe it requires multiple microphones, so no problem, we can have multiple microphones. As I said, each of these uses one channel of echo cancellation on Qsys, so that's okay. And if we want to have multiple cameras or the ability for a camera with longer zoom, then we might be using our PTZ IP 20x60. So we're going to get rid of the Logitech Rally, and remember that Core's doing audio bridging, but it could do video bridging as well. And we're going to add in 2 of our PTZ IP cameras. So now we've got one at the front, one at the rear. So quite common, you might have one for somebody presenting at the front of the room that's being streamed out somewhere. And you might have one for the audience, perhaps. And of course, this also works for like education spaces, lecture theatres, things like that. It's a similar kind of approach. Just a word on content sharing into these kind of spaces. So you're using the PC for the MTR for the actual conference connection. If you want to share some video from your PC, just be aware the Logitech Tap does have an HDMI input, so you can wired connect into that and you can share from that wired input. You can also join the meeting on your own personal laptop, but just for the purposes of sharing. When you join, you can say, I just want to share my screen. I don't want to do audio, video, that kind of thing, because that's all being taken care of by the room. And then if you wanted to share some content just to the local screen, you might also have some wireless display in there. You could have something like a click share, or maybe Immersive Solstice, others as well. Although we do have a plugin for click share, particularly, where we can monitor it and we can do all kinds of integrations with it and Qsys. And remember, because you've got that Teams license on here, you've got access to all of the scripting engine features of Qsys. So any kind of clever control you want to do, you've got all of that built into the core. So there's one example of a fairly built up meeting room. But what if we go even bigger? So what if we want to do something like this? So two-way divisible space with Teams, making sure that this has all the features you would want of a divisible room. So in this example, the requirements are that we have firstly a MTR, and so an MTR PC, Teams Room PC, and a Logitech Tap per room. So we want them to be able to function as individual spaces. Now, as we start to open the room up, we've got 2 displays per room, so we want the ability for any of the PCs to go to any of the displays. And we're going to be using dual output on those PCs. So when you do that, the experience is that you have, for example, you might have the conference on one screen, somebody sharing content on the other, that kind of thing. But as the room opens up, maybe we want to duplicate that on 2 displays. And maybe that's going from A to B or B to A or some kind of weird combination. We basically want the ability to send anything anywhere. Same thing with cameras. We're going to have 2 cameras in each room. And when the rooms are opened up, obviously you want to be able to select from 4 cameras to 1 PC. And then on that second page on the Logitech Tap, when the rooms are combined, we want to synchronize those so that if you go to either panel on the second page, you'll see the same thing in a combined space. When the rooms are separate, that second page would be 2 different things, as you'd expect. Now we've got some fairly complex bridging and video requirements here. So we're going to introduce something which hasn't yet completely finished Teams certification, but it's really the right product for this kind of space, which is the MV32H. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with this, but those of you who are not, it's another Qsys peripheral. And just like you have audio peripherals for onboarding audio and you have cameras, this is the same kind of thing, except it's a HDMI video encoder or decoder, and it's also another USB bridge. Now, just very quickly going to introduce this for those of you who are new to it. It's essentially video over IP, but really designed for the conference room. And that means that you don't just have one input or one output. You actually have, if you're using it as an encoder and you're using it at 1080p resolution, you've got 3 completely independent encoders on there. So you see there's 3 HDMI ins. I can connect 3 distinct sources to those. They all get encoded separately and they can all go off to different locations, or they can all go off to the same location, whatever you want. You've got 3 encoders in the one box. And as a decoder at 1080p, you can connect 2 displays, which is exactly what we want here. And of course, very common in lots of meeting spaces. 2 displays completely independently on the same decoder. So we don't need lots of these boxes to have multiple inputs, multiple outputs. Now, in addition, whether it's an encoder or a decoder, you've got a USB bridge, which works exactly the same way as the USB bridge on the core. So we could either use the core USB bridge or this one, and we are able to get the same results with bridging cameras and bridging audio. Now, in addition, you've got analog audio in, analog audio out, GPIO, RS-232, and the network connections, USB connections. Okay. Just a quick example here. If you're using it as an encoder, then you might do something like this. You could have, like I said, 3 sources going to the HDMI and getting encoded to the network. As a side note, not something we're going to do here probably, but you can also connect a display to the encoder as like a confidence monitor. And then as a decoder, like I said, 2 independent displays. Each one can switch between any network source or any of the 3 inputs on the decoder as well. So HDMI and network switching per display. So what we're going to do is we're going to hook it up like this firstly. And we're just looking at room A for now, just one half of this divisible space. We're going to have our PC, our Teams PC, as I said, dual output. So dual displays going into an NV32, which is in encoder mode. So it's going to be encoding those two streams at the same time to the network. USB bridge on that, and we're using that to do our audio video bridging into the PC. Now, for the display, of course, we're going to have a decoder, one decoder for two displays. Nice and simple. Now, we'll also hook up our Logitech tap, same way we did in the smaller space, and we'll hook up our amplifier and speakers. But in this case, they're going to connect to the analog output on the NV. And that analog output is not tied to any of the video stuff the NV is doing. It can be any audio from the whole Qsys system can come out of that line output there, no problem. Add in, as we did before, our microphones, and we'll have a couple of cameras here. And then just to round everything off in this room, we'll have a core. And in this case, it could well be a Core Nano, because all of our I/O is being taken care of by these NV32s. And if you don't know, a Core Nano is half rack unit core. It's about half the power of a Core 110F, and it doesn't have any analog inputs or any GPIO on it. It's all based around the network, which of course means it's quite cost effective while still being really, really powerful. And then we've got a QSC NS1108P switch there as well. Now that's room A. Now room B is very simple. It's going to be the exact same thing, but we don't need another core, right? We can just have that one Core Nano manage the whole thing. If the rooms want to be separate, they can be separate. If they want to be combined, they can be combined. One Core Nano doing all of that, and then just a couple of NVs per room managing all the video, all the USB bridging, and the audio output as well. And this is what it's all about. If we compare this to what we did at the start, where we had that sort of slightly spider's web like drawing of all the HDMI extenders and USB things, this is about just a few bits of equipment that are doing everything on the network. Now, one last thing to point out here, which is not really to do with Teams, but it's kind of an extension of what we might want to do on these rooms. Sometimes end users say to us, like, yeah, Teams rooms, we want Teams rooms, it's great, but obviously from time to time somebody's hot desking, somebody walks in with a laptop, maybe they're visiting for the day, and they just want to use the room for what they want to do on their laptop, and that might be, you know, WebEx or Zoom or what have you. And you know, they have to say, oh, it's not, you can't really, it's a Teams room, it's really dedicated to Teams. But with Qsys, we can have as many USB bridges as we want. So in this case, we've got one per room connected to an MTR. If we wanted to add another USB bridge, we can then have any other PC use all the equipment in the room. They can use the displays, they can listen to the mics, they can use the cameras without taking anything away from what Teams is doing. Although you might not do it at the same time as Teams, but you know, you can just use it while Teams is using it if you want. So to do that, if we just add something like another NV32, that could be under the table perhaps for a laptop. It basically turns the room into a bring your own device room. This means you can do USB bridging to that PC from any of the cameras to any software that supports USB, which is obviously most things. The PC is going to receive the room audio and the cameras as well. And also that PC going into an NV can output to any display as well. So just by adding one more piece of equipment, one more NV32, or if you just wanted bridging only, just a USB bridge, you can now completely turn this room into a BYOD room whenever you want. And that's something that a lot of end users have, you know, found really, really valuable. And it's, imagine if you're doing it the traditional way with lots of USB and HDMI equipment, to suddenly pivot all of that away from going to Teams to going to some ad hoc PC, very, very complicated to do that. Okay, guys, any questions right now, just before we wrap up with some extra section at the end? Okay, cool. All right, well, in that case, I've just got a couple of other little bits I want to talk about. And firstly, these are to do with making life a little bit easier for the end user, particularly the end user IT department, who are going to be managing these spaces long term. And the first one is this. This looks a bit like a phone app, and it behaves just like a phone app, except it's really another Qsys UCI running on the core. And imagine if you're a non-technical, maybe not an AV person, maybe you're in the IT department, something like that, and you just want to make some basic adjustment to a couple of spaces. You might want to just change the volume, you might want to change noise reduction, and there's a few other things there as well that you can adjust. You can just pull this up on your phone and just make those changes without even looking at Qsys Design or even knowing what that is. Perhaps you can just do it here very simply. So that's just a nice feature that we can do without too much trouble using that team's sample design. Now, in addition, you're going to want to get reporting about when people are doing this, when they're making changes to these spaces, because if people are making changes all over the place, you want to keep track of it. And one thing the IT department's probably going to have is an internal Teams channel. So they might have room commissioning as a section in their Teams desktop channel. And Qsys can actually talk to that as well. There's the option for what's called a webhook. You can add a webhook to your Teams channel. You can try it on Teams desktop yourself, and then it can give you a URL, and you can take that URL, pop it into the Teams design file. That's part of the setup process. It says, do you want to add a webhook URL? Yes, I do. And then whenever you do anything in the room to do with changing the config, it's going to post there. So you would go into your Teams channel and see something like this. So here it says commissioning finished in the training room. You can see when that happened. But also the core is always monitoring its own config. So if somebody goes deep into that Qsys designer file and starts messing around with the audio config too much, it's then going to fall out of what Microsoft considers the certified configuration. And that's you can do that. That's totally fine. You might want to do that because you're doing something, really weird and bespoke in that room, and that's okay. But it does technically mean that the room is no longer meeting Microsoft spec for the audio signal path. So it will post something like that. It will say the training room is now out of spec. You might want to recommission the system. So just a nice way of keeping track. And then lastly, we were asked about the Sennheiser microphone, and because we know that that's what's going to be used in these spaces as part of the room solution, we're able to do some really cool integration with that. Now, we've had this for a little while. This is the Qsys plugin that's on the Qsys Designer Asset Manager for controlling the Team Connect Ceiling 2. And you can see on the left, there's obviously some audio config you can do on it, but it also gives you in real time the vertical angle for the source detection and the horizontal angle. So whenever somebody speaks in the room, it's going to point straight to them and you're going to get that angle immediately in Qsys. So very, very helpful. That's been around for some time, but because we've got full control of the microphone, full monitoring of the mic, native Qsys cameras where we know where they are all the time, we can control where they are the whole time, and as part of that same system, it's not a separate control system, that's inside Qsys, which is also doing all the audio processing and listening to all the audio. We're able to do automatic camera preset recall without too much difficulty. So we've also made an additional plugin, which is also now available on the Qsys Designer Asset Manager, to enable this automatic camera preset recall. And this is something that's really cool. I mean, personally, we've been implementing this recently in the Weybridge office and also at Sennheiser's office and a few other places. And it's just been really, really nice to work with, really easy to set up. You can basically take certain angles and you can then link those to camera positions and selected cameras. So I might say, if I'm sitting at 90 degrees from the microphone, I want that to be the front camera at this location, save. If I'm over here, it wants to be this camera, different camera perhaps. And it's going to do all the switching for you. It's going to do all the moving of the cameras for you. And then you've obviously got controls for how fast it does it, which is something you definitely want. Everybody has a different opinion about how fast these things should work. Now, importantly, it's really scalable. So you could do it with just one camera and one mic, or if you've got that divisible space where we've got 2 cameras and 1 mic per room, so it opens up into 4 cameras, 2 mics. That's fine because this plugin can have up to 4 cameras attached to it, 10 mics, which is a huge number, and also 10 zones, which links to the cameras per microphone. So really huge amount of scalability, and that's available right now. And remember, you've already got the Teams feature license on your core, which unlocks the whole scripting engine. So this, the Sennheiser plugin, and any other third-party device control you want to do doesn't cost any more in terms of hardware or software. It's already on the core, and you just can get the plugins and use them straight away. Whereas if you were going to go for a dedicated camera tracking solution, that's not going to be the case. Now, I just got a couple of frequently asked questions I wanted to touch on before we wrap up. Firstly, what if I don't want to use a Sennheiser microphone? What if I'm standardized on some other microphone? Well, as we all know, technically that's fine. Technically, other network mics are going to work with Qsys, but it all comes down to that Teams Room certification element. So if the end user says, well, all these spaces, of course, they need to be Microsoft certified, and you have different microphones with Qsys, it's not going to meet that element we talked about earlier, where the complete audio signal path needs to be certified. And that might not matter to the end user, or it might be really important. So it's just a discussion you'll need to have. But also, these things we just talked about, camera tracking. It's possible to do that with other microphones, but it's not something that's already been worked out and done for you. The streamlining of deployment with that wizard, which is already set up to use the Sennheiser mic, that's not going to work. So there'll just need to be some considerations you need to make if you go down that route. What if I've already got a Teams room with Qsys and I've already got Logitech Tap or similar? Can I use all of these extra features? Yes, you can. So this doesn't require new Qsys hardware. What you will need is Qsys Designer 9.0, which is the first version that can use, for example, the second page experience, Qsys Control for MTR. And you will also need the scripting license and the UCI license, which you may already have. And if you don't have them, you can just purchase the Teams license, which includes all of that under one SKU. And this is quite a hot topic for those of you programming DSP. If I connect to Qsys USB bridge, will it disable the internal AEC on the Teams Room PC? Yes, it will. So certified USB bridges, certified devices are what we call whitelisted. They're on a list of Teams devices that you can disable the AEC for, and that includes these Qsys devices. So just to summarize, guys, remember that we are the first partner to have room systems for these high value spaces, specialty spaces, as we said, training rooms, divisible rooms, these kind of things. Nobody else has room solutions that are certified for these kind of complex spaces. We also have the largest portfolio of certified devices as well. But again, forgetting Teams just for a second, we've also got compatibility with all the other major conferencing applications. And that's really good for bring your own device, or if you want these kind of multi codec rooms where they can work with all sorts of different things. So Google Meet, Zoom, got lots of integration with Zoom, with our Zoom plugin, and the ability of Zoom room controls to talk to Qsys. Cisco WebEx, where we can actually have the Touch 10 panel control elements of Qsys with our Cisco plugin. So remember that this is all available on Qsys, as well as all these new Teams integrations. So thanks very much for listening.